start, and we're behind schedule by 20 minutes, so we'll try and make up some time.
Good man.
Members, can I remind you that this meeting will be recorded and ask you that to note the mobile phones are switched off as interfere with the recording, and tablet devices should be switched to mute. Remind members to declare their interest as appropriate throughout the meeting. Can I declare the meeting open to the public? Agenda item 1. Any apologies?
None yet.
None yet. Agenda item 2, chairperson's business.
Nothing.
No, there's nothing. We have. Agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting, the 2nd of June 2015. Can I refer members to the draft minutes of the meeting held the 2nd of June 2015 at pages 6 to 10. Are members content that the draft minutes are accurate? Okay. So I will sign. Okay. Agenda item 4, an oral briefing from Dorda and Reservoir Review Audit. Can I refer members to the papers from the department at pages 12 to 15? The papers and the briefing are an update on the development of the review of reservoirs and reservoir audit that this committee requested and which were a condition of the bill being allowed to proceed in the Assembly. Can I welcome David Porter, Director of Operations, and Kieran Brazier, Head of Reservoirs Bill Team. You're very welcome, and can I ask you to take up to 10 minutes to address the committee, and then we'll ask some questions, okay?
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. In all likelihood, we'll probably not need 10 minutes for the presentation this morning.
All the better.
All the better, yeah. We've given you the written brief, and I just want to draw your attention to a couple of issues in this, because this is really an update on the process more than anything else. So whenever we started the whole issue of reservoirs, we had identified a big long list of potential bodies of water which we thought were reservoirs, and through this process we've continued to refine that number down and down. And whenever we went out to public consultation, it was sitting in around 151, and then we subsequently refined that down to, and the last time we spoke, 137, and said that there was some other work that we needed to do on some of those. Where we're finding the differences are those reservoirs which are very close to the 10,000 cubic metre threshold. So we looked at those ones up to 15,000 and those which were down below, because the rudimentary approach that we took to determining that threat or that capacity, if we do a much more detailed look at it, sometimes we can actually find out that there's less water in it, and therefore they're not subject to the legislation. So we've managed to get it down now to 132 reservoirs, which we think will be subject to the legislation. A couple of things to draw out of our findings on that. Even though we started with a big long list, there are still new reservoirs being uncovered by the work that we're doing. Either people coming and saying that they've heard something about the reservoir bill, or in one case an MLA coming to us and wanting to speak to us about a particular structure. And so there's still a little bit of a health warning around the 132, in that the legislation will require owners to register, and it's only after we go through that registration process that we will be able to say the number is absolutely a particular figure, but we're getting more and more content that we're getting closer and closer to that figure. There are still some ongoing work, because, as I say, we've gone out and visited some of these structures to determine whether they're below the threshold. Some of those visits have identified, actually, we maybe need to do some survey work to determine with more certainty what the capacity of that reservoir is. So there's still 9 reservoirs that we're still working on in order to determine their actual capacity. And again, our hope would be, or certainly our thought would be at this stage, that some of those certainly will be likely to be below that 10,000 cubic metre threshold. But we're happy enough whenever we get a significant update to this figure. Whenever these next 9 are done, we can probably give you a written update on that, and if you want us to come and speak to it, we're quite happy, but we can undertake to do that. So what's the reservoir review? 132 reservoirs at this moment in time. In terms of the reservoir audit, just to remind the committee of the context of that, we brought forward the bill, basically starting all the requirements in one big bang, in one fell swoop. The committee had concerns about that, particularly in relation to the unknown about the condition of the reservoir stock, and we agreed to introduce the bill in 2 phases. phase one, just bringing in the definition and bringing in the requirement to inspect, but not bringing in the recurring elements of reservoir management. And we're not bringing in those elements in phase two until such times as we can demonstrate what is the cost of bringing reservoirs up to a reasonable standard. And really that's what the reservoir audit is attempting to do. It's to, in anticipation of the legislation hitting the statute book, start that process of gathering the information. And I must say we've had very, very good success to date in encouraging private sector and third sector reservoir managers to take the assistance that's on offer and to provide us and to start to provide us with the information. And you can see the figures there. 94 have agreed to take part, 16 are undecided, and 3 have not responded. And we're working through those latter, the 16 and the 3. We're still working through those to try and encourage those to avail of the funding that's available, because we believe and can demonstrate to them that it's actually in their best interest for them to provide the information to us, because what they get is a product, an inspection report that will be able to satisfy the requirements of the legislation whenever it comes into place. And so they get a double benefit. If we just do it ourselves, they only get the single benefit of us having the information. They don't get the inspection report. And what we have found is that whenever we go out to the undecided and explain this to them, most people get that. They realise that this is a benefit. They don't like the fact that what they might find out, and we understand that, and we are working through with a number of reservoir managers what that will mean for them and what their options are. But we did get a couple of people that said they didn't want it, they would prefer us to do it. And what we did in those cases is we went back out just to make sure that they understood that decision. And whenever the staff went out and explained, this is the consequence of that, maybe you want to rethink, some of them actually did change their mind and are availing of the grant directly themselves. So we hopefully will be in a position where we have a very, very high degree of take-up, that we will be able to produce a report. Maybe it won't be able to give 100% of the picture in reservoir audit, but we'll certainly be able a picture of very, very high 90% of the audit condition. The 3 that haven't responded give us some concern. Have we identified the right owner? Maybe it's more complex. Maybe it's held in the trust. Maybe there's people that are deceased. Maybe it's held in some sort of complex company arrangement. So they do give us some concern that we may well still have to work on those. But in the main, we're getting very, very good returns on that. The last thing to say is if there are any reservoir managers that approach you as committee members or as MLAs, if you can give them a bit of reassurance that if they come and talk to us, we will do all that we can in our powers to demonstrate that this is a good idea, to take the £2,500 to get this inspection. We will do our best to try and explain that to people, that it's in their best interest. And also that if they can talk to us early about the management regime, because we're now at final stage in the legislation, we're fairly sure that this is okay, that this is going to be the regime going forward. And the sooner we are in a conversation with those owners of those structures which may well be problematic, the better it will be for them and for us. That we don't want to get into a contentious relationship or enforcement. We would much, much prefer to have an informal discussion to help them along this path, so that we can come back to the committee and report a high level of compliance and a plan for those reservoirs which are in poor order. So hopefully that's give you an insight into the position on the reservoir review and also where we are with the reservoir audit. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, David. I think for some people there may be a fear factor and not sure what it all entails, and I think that's why it's vitally important that they do get all the information that's necessary.
Yeah.
In regard to, see, there's 31 engineers that have agreed to be available. It's up to the reservoir owner or to employee, whichever one of those they want to get.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
There was a concern at an earlier stage with the committee that there was a dearth of these people,
Yeah.
there wouldn't be enough, and that because there was only one that lived in Northern Ireland, that he would have a monopoly and therefore could cause the prices to rise.
Yeah.
There's clearly a very viable market there. 31 options, you'll get somebody who will give you the service that you want at a competitive price.
Is granted up to 2,500 or 2,500? Is that a flat rate or is it up to 2,500?
It's up to 2,500,
Okay.
because we did recognise that some structures are less complex.
Yeah.
So we're paying actuals up to a cap of 2,500.
And you would suspect that the charges by engineers will be according to the size of the reservoir, is that the way?
And the complexity of what they have to do, and also what drives it as well is the availability of existing information. So if they go out to a reservoir where there's, for instance, if we didn't have a river model for it and they weren't sure of the inflows and weren't sure of the outflows,
They'd have to
may
identify all those, yeah.
might have to develop that. Whereas in some cases where we have an existing river model, we may well be able to give them a certain level of information that would start that process, and therefore it will be cheaper.
Okay. Sidney Anderson?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. David, I note with interest that 2 reservoirs have been added to the database, and one was previously considered incapable of retaining water,
That's right.
and it's now considered capable. How or who gave that previous decision? Like, how did that come about? The reason it wasn't, and now it is.
Yeah.
And it's one of the ones in the higher designation.
Yeah. Okay. Craig and Upper, the reason why it wasn't considered to be capable was because it had actually failed. So it failed in, off the top of my head, 1972. And therefore it was considered that it could no longer hold water because it had actually lost the content of the reservoir. But a site visit indicated that whilst an element of it had failed, there still could be a scenario where that failure, that blockage or that hole in the reservoir could be blocked, and therefore it is still technically capable.
Was it inspected?
No, well, again...
It's just taken on the reason that it failed away back in 1972.
Well, there's no requirement on anybody to inspect until such time. So again, we're working on information just to give an indication of the scale of the problem. It wasn't that there's any statutory decision or statutory inspection taken on it, because that will only come into place whenever we have the reservoir audit. However, the benefit, and this is another example where our engagement with people may help, because we have flagged up that this may well be subject to the legislation, but the legislation is currently not applicable. That at least allows that reservoir manager to say, well, actually it failed. Maybe there are some works that I could do to that structure today and get signed off by an engineer. That would mean that whenever the legislation comes into place, it will not be a reservoir, and therefore I'm not subject to the burden. So I wouldn't take it as a negative that that's been flagged up. It's actually a positive, because he's getting early warning, and he has a period of time now in which he can actually take measures to make sure that that's not a reservoir under the legal definition, and that's the way he's viewed it in our discussions with him.
Are there possibly any others like that we don't know about?
Well, there's a couple that we have identified that have failed, and some of those, there's at least one that came back onto our list that we looked at that we thought wasn't capable, that is now back on, that was part of the 137 previously. And again, a similar conversation will have taken place with the reservoir manager to explain, I know it's not holding water today, but we believe it's potentially capable, and therefore maybe more works are required to make sure that it's not capable. But the most important bit of this is, if you are going to do any works like that, make sure you get an engineer to sign it off so that we are satisfied that you don't do works and then we still think it's a reservoir. Make sure you do that bit properly. Therefore we can, with evidence, take it off the database and pursue it.
Just to finish, when a reservoir, the actual size of the reservoir, the 10,000 cubic metres, how accurate is the measurement or the assessment of that? Are there any sitting on the borderline there, which designation it falls into? Are there any like that?
Well, there was quite a range that were in around the 10,000. That's where we have focused the reservoir review. And that's where we've actually refined that to see whether our assumptions were okay, or whether they have been overestimating the size. And that's where I said we have actually identified some where we have actually had to go out and physically measure them, get a survey done of the structure and of the impoundment in order to determine how much water is actually held in them. So you're right that there are some that were like that, but we're trying to address it, and that's one of the reasons why
That
we're
would be
bringing that
on the
number
survey,
down.
it's not desktop, or what do you call
No,
it?
no.
Like survey.
Initially, it was a desktop.
Yeah.
And it was them, whenever it identified those ones, and we had a threshold off the top of my head, it was from about 7,500 to 15,000 was our focus area, where we knew we need to be sure about these ones, that we're not requiring owners to comply with the bill, whenever actually at a later date it might be shown that they didn't need to be compliant with the bill. So those are the ones that we're are focusing on. But equally, if there's a reservoir manager out there that feels that they're still on the list, either tell them to come and talk to us, or it may well be worth them doing a little bit of work at this stage to determine what the capacity is, if they think that it's marginal and if they think that it might be below the 10,000, because I suspect that will be a whole lot cheaper than the full weight of the reservoir legislation for forever and ever and ever.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Joanne Dobson.
Thanks, Chair. My question's largely been covered by Sydney's points. I just wanted to find out, has the department conducted a review to see if there's any other reservoirs out there they haven't found yet? So I think you've broadly answered that, David, as well. Those would it not have been better to have held information reservoirs ahead of the bill over the last few years, or would that not have been possible given the circumstances in which these reservoirs then came to light to you?
Well, we've had a number of exercises to determine the reservoirs. That's where I said at the start we ended up with a big long list, about 200 bodies of water. Some of those were natural lakes, and some of them were quarry ponds, and not what we would have considered reservoir. And so that's where we've whittled that down and whittled that down. So, but again, that was primarily a desktop exercise. And so what we're now finding, whenever we're getting close to thinking about starting the legislation, other people have brought bodies of water to us and said, well, is this a reservoir and will it be part of it? And so that's where we found certainly one in Craigmore that we weren't aware of. But I suspect we've got a very high percentage of the reservoirs are on our list.
Do you think it's unlikely that any more will be brought to your attention?
I would suspect if there are others, it is certainly single figures, and it is low single figures if there are other reservoirs out there. But it will be, we're fairly content that we've done as exhaustive a process as is possible to try and get the right number.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ian.
Oh, thanks
Okay.
very much, Chair. I'll just ask if, since the start of the reservoir bill, has there been anybody offloaded, any water ownership of it, sold off, no reservoir or anything like that effect, no, over that period of time? Is there any evidence of that?
There's been none that have been sold that I'm aware of, but Northern Ireland Water has 48 reservoirs, of which there are still, it's either 16 or 17, that they are not required for their purposes of supplying public water, and their intention is to dispose of those. Obviously, the bill has probably made that process slightly more complex for them, and plus, I'm not sure if there's ready buyers of reservoirs in the current climate, but I'm not aware of any that have actually been sold during the period whenever the reservoir bill has been being brought forward.
Okay, that's good, thanks. That's it.
Okay, Joe Byrne.
Simon, just a bit of clarification. The Craigan Upper Reservoir, is that, who's the owner of that?
Craigan Upper is part of there's Craigan Middle, Upper and Lower, and all three of those sit within the Craigan Country Park. If you recall, you got evidence from Craigan Country Park during your scrutiny of the bill. The Craigan Country Park is the manager, as we understand it, of those structures.
So it's the council that still is the ultimate owner?
I believe that the council may well have some responsibility in terms of the ownership of the land, but certainly from our discussions with Craigan Country Park, they recognise that they have the day-to-day responsibility for the structures and therefore would be, under the bill, considered to be the reservoir manager.
Thanks, Simon.
Okay. What happens in the event of an engineer going to a reservoir and they ascertain that it's in a very dangerous state and there is a possibility of a failure at any time? Have you any system in place to deal with that? What I mean is that you can't take the risk on leaving it be for months on end to get repaired.
But certainly what happened in Camlock is a good example where an engineer, was called to view the structure, was concerned, and therefore the bodies stepped in. In that case, it was bodies who, one, understood the risk, and two, had access to resources in order to deal with an incident or to avert an incident. So we're dealing here with Northern Ireland Water and New and Moore District Council. I think the more complex situation is if the reservoir audit identifies a private reservoir, and that's something that we've talked about in the past in committee, that whilst there would be no onus on the reservoir manager in law to do anything, certainly if we have that information and they have that information, we'll be sitting down and having a discussion with them about how we need to deal with that. And if it is something that is absolutely critical at the point of failure, the department may well have to step in and offer assistance in that situation in the interests of public safety, because that's the point that we continually make through bringing this bill forward, that this is in the interests of public safety. And so if the department knows that something's in poor condition, we certainly need to engage with the owner of that structure to work out how this can be addressed. And there would be a responsibility on the department as the reservoir authority to certainly take that very seriously. And if there was something at the point of failure, I suspect we would be having a very close look at that to see what steps are required in order to minimise that likelihood. I'm talking theoretically because we haven't identified any, thankfully, and two, it will be those decisions will be very, very bespoke to that situation, and it would depend who the owner is, what other resources they have to manage that, whether drawn down, the water releases the pressure on it in the short term, or whether there's more significant expenditure in the interest of public safety required immediately. So it's a sort of a very general answer, but I think you get the gist of where we are.
Ian?
Thanks, Chair. Again, sorry for going back here. Co-ownership, are you aware of any of the reservoirs there in co-ownership?
Oh yeah, quite a few of them are, yeah.
You know off the top of the head how many, you know?
Many of them.
And I suppose that's an arrangement between the two partners, you know, come up with whoever's going to put management on.
A lot of the undecideds on the private sector are because it's not so much about the audit, it's about who owns it and who owns which part of it. And we're liaising with different partners on different reservoirs to try and get them together to make that decision. So of the 8 private sector that are undecided, I would say 5 or 6 of them are because of co-ownership.
Okay. No, that's grand. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much again. Okay. Thank you. Then item 5, an overbriefing on Land Matters Task Force, Land Matters Strategy. Can I refer members to the paper from the Land Matters Task Force, pages 17 to 20? Can I welcome Dr. Jonathan Bale, NIEL, John Martin, RSPB, Martin Carey, Mourne Heritage Trust, and Peter Mullen, Landscape Institute. You're very welcome. Can I ask you to take up to 10 minutes for your presentation, and then we'll ask some questions? Okay.
Thank you. Just to say, Pete Mullen couldn't be with us today, so apologies on his behalf.
Okay, sorry, yeah, okay.
Yes, Chair, thank you for the invite. And I'd just like to say to Ian Millen, I don't know if he's coming back, he's probably heard this presentation before, so apologies for that. But you've probably got a copy of our 2-page brief to hand there. I think they were sent in advance.
Yeah.
As I'm a policy officer at Northern Ireland Environment Link, and we are the forum and networking body for the environmental sector in Northern Ireland. We have a number of themed task forces ranging from planning to energy to transport. And in November 2013, to be exact, we set up the Land Matters Task Force. And that came out of a bit of strong interest from our membership around the issues of land and landscape. We say after our first initial meeting in November 13, we had further meetings looking at what would the work plan be of our task force. And what came out of this was a priority action around developing some strategic policy around land and landscape in Northern Ireland and seeking to promote that. The rationale for this was a strong recognition of the competing demands and pressures on our land and landscape resource in Northern Ireland, a finite resource and one that we think is often taken for granted. I'm not going to labour this point any longer, so I'm going to hand over to John, who's going to take you through the main sections of the report.
Thank you, Johnny. So I don't need to tell the people on this committee just the importance of land and land use to Northern Ireland. Agriculture is obviously a massive employer in Northern Ireland, and it's massive in terms of our heritage. But also there's multiple different uses for land. We need land for clean water, we need land for energy, we need land for recreation and health. We need land for tourism. That's one of the major draws to Northern Ireland as a tourist attraction is our landscape. We need land to live on and housing. We need land for aggregates as well. So one of the things that we're not making anything more of in Northern Ireland is land. And there are many different competing demands that are coming from land and how it's used. And I suppose climate change has thrown into the mix how land is used and what the different threats to land are, and it throws it all into a big melting pot. And I think the Land Matters Task Force believes that Northern Ireland PLC is maybe not being as strategic as it could be with how we use our land. Now, there's definitely been efforts in the past 5 years to be more strategic in how we use our land through new planning legislation, through the agri-food strategy that has instigated an agricultural land use plan. And I suppose this is partly our contribution towards that. So we believe that land is a precious resource and one of Northern Ireland's most important resources. And if we truly believe in a shared future, we have to look at land as our shared future. It's the one thing that we have in common, and it's the one thing that we need to start prioritising better. Just in terms of some of the things that we started to look at, so the Land Matters Task Force tasked a consultant called the James Hutton Institute in Scotland to pull together this resource with ourselves and with other stakeholders. So we got together a key list of stakeholders for the James Hutton Institute to talk to about the importance of land and land use in Northern Ireland. They developed a draft document and then we fed into that to make sure it was proofed for Northern Ireland. We chose the James Hutton Institute, and they're Scottish based because in Scotland they have a land use strategy which came as a result of their climate change legislation, and the land use strategy in Scotland is fairly well advanced and is in a pilot study phase, and we thought that James Hutton's involvement in that would be very useful for our involvement in Northern Ireland. So basically what we have now is this kind of hard copy of the report, and what we're saying, it's difficult maybe for to fathom actually what this is. This isn't actually a strategy in itself, but it's our contribution towards a discussion that we feel needs to be had by the Northern Ireland Executive in developing a land strategy for Northern Ireland. And what this does, it sets out the tone. So it provides a rationale for what a strategy could do. It provides a number of guiding principles for what a strategy could do, and it provides a vision for what a strategy could do. But it also looks into the different sections that contribute to land and land use in Northern Ireland. And I went through a few of them at the start, like agriculture obviously is a major one, land for tourism, land for housing, etc. I think it's worthwhile just looking at the vision for the document, which is land and landscapes managed to deliver well-being and prosperity, respecting the views of communities, groups and individuals, striving for environmental excellence and taking advantage of the multiple functions of land. So it's a bit of a mouthful and it's not particularly catchy, but we feel that it sets the tone for where we want this to go. Moving forward and just looking at the strategic policy fit, because I'm sure a lot of people feel that there's enough strategy in Northern Ireland and there's enough, I guess, future thinking into things that we maybe don't need anymore. But we really feel like this takes a two-pronged approach. So it has a high-level approach where the strategy is developed at the highest levels of government, but also the strategy is informed by stakeholders on the ground. So the strategy would not be implemented unless it has widespread community involvement. So just in terms of the strategic policy fit for the strategy, we feel like it sits alongside the single planning policy statement at the top and the regional development strategy, and the land strategy for Northern Ireland then is nestled in between those two things. Then below that, just in your presentation there, it's the penultimate slide, it shows the different kind of sub strategies that we feel would come underneath that. So there's the sustainable development strategy, there's the agriculture strategy, there's a biodiversity strategy, there's the tourism strategy, there's the Northern Ireland business strategy as well. So we feel like the land strategy would sit nestled in between two overreaching strategies, so the single planning policy statement and the regional development strategy. In terms of some of our vision and our general principles, we want this to be something that's all-inclusive, and we want this to be something that is benefit to the people that it is targeted towards. So we wouldn't like to see anything going forward that was overly bureaucratic or provided, I guess, would put the brakes on certain things for people, but we'd like to see a land strategy act as a lens, essentially, for how we manage our land in the future. And to progress that, we really feel that there needs to be high-level buy-in from this at this stage. So we would very much like to see a commitment from the Northern Ireland Government to include the potential of a land strategy in the next programme for government. Now, we're not saying we would like to see a land strategy developed by the time the next programme for government is going forward. We very much see this as a long-term vision, but we'd like to see a commitment from the Assembly to develop it. We'd also like to progress some discussions with this committee and with the Environment Committee in terms of holding an event of some sort, and we wondered if we would be able to do that within the next Assembly term, just to get all the relevant stakeholders together in a room to discuss the potential of this approach. Also looking ahead to how Northern Ireland Government is changing, we very much see the new Department of Agriculture and Department of Environment merge as an opportunity to see this move forward, and we really feel that this document provides a really good basis for that new department, because it's going to be pulling together agriculture as a major component and the environment as a major component, and we feel that a potential land strategy acts as a good flagship policy for that new department to be able to pull those things together and to get good outputs from everyone. So just to conclude, just to say thank you very much for the committee to inviting us up to talk to you about it. We realise that this is just a start. We don't feel like this is exhaustive by any means, and I guess our point for coming to see you guys is to, I guess this is a consultation, and we want to hear your views, and we want to be able this to be as useful for everyone as possible. So just to finish there and open for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. In the second general principle, it focuses on regulation. It says regulation should protect public interests while avoiding placing an onerous burden on business and landowners. And we know in this committee very well this is difficult to do. Farmers are faced with already an amazing amount of regulation, and some of which is extremely nitpicking at the moment, and as many feel is unnecessary. How will any land strategy protect the interests of the farmer and wider rural community?
I think it's a very good question, and we recognise that, yes, there is regulation out there. We also feel that a certain amount of the schemes that farmers have to comply with have a certain amount of regulation. Some of that is unnecessary, but some of that is necessary as well. But we wouldn't like to see a regulatory system that burdens farmers. We only like to see regulation that is to the benefit of farmers and all land users. So in terms of how we would proof that, within the development of this strategy. If you look to the back of our report and our briefing, you'll see that the Ulster Farmers Union have signed up to the report, and the Quarry Products Association as a major minerals user. So the Ulster Farmers Union were very helpful in giving us information and helping us draft this report, in particular the agriculture sector and our agriculture section. And they were able to, I guess, give us pointers as to where they thought we were being onerous and where we weren't, and very much would like, I guess, to think that they would be involved in this in an ongoing way, where they'd be able to point out to us, where they feel that this could potentially develop too much regulation, or maybe where there is not enough in some cases. Maybe you think there's no such thing, but I guess we want this to be reflective of that sector as best as possible, which is why they're involved as an important consultee.
You can understand how farmers become touchy and faithful with things like this, because you understand that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could I perhaps add on that, Chair? Part of the origins of this work was it came out of reflections on the national park debate in Northern Ireland, which I was closely involved with, and others. And one of the issues that came out of that very much was that there was a concern that that sort of initiative would have been very regulatory, and a sense perhaps that we had jumped to an answer as to how we manage Northern Ireland's best landscapes before we'd gone through the thinking process. So to some extent this strategy is maybe to allow for a more comprehensive thinking about land and why it's valuable and how you can best manage it. And another touchstone, I guess, for it that we didn't mention is the European Landscape Convention, where we've been quite good at implementing in Northern Ireland the European directives, which are quite regulatory, Habitats Directive, etc. But the Landscape Convention is a convention, it's not a directive. But when many people look at it, you could say it was almost written for Northern Ireland, because it very much talks about the principles of people and place. And so we thought there was a lot in the approach there, collaborative, proactive, formative, that was worth having a discussion around. And again, hence that was a motivator for the document as well.
Okay. Joe Byrne.
Chairman, what's the general parameters you're working to? The way there's this talk about A and C, areas of natural constraint, coming in under the European CAP situation. Are you connected to that?
Yeah, well, I suppose...
What's your views on rotational cropping?
I suppose it maybe doesn't fall within the bounds of this report, and I wouldn't like to preempt any answer from the Land Matters Task Force, because we probably don't have a policy position on that. But I would say that we would take cognizance of all the different aspects of CAP, to see, what is it achieving in Northern Ireland, and we know that there is a CAP health check in 2017 to see if it's doing what it says it was. So we would look at all those things in the round to make sure it was delivering, best for agriculture, but also delivering for other areas of land use, because land is multifunctional after all. So is it delivering for clean water, for example? Is it delivering for biodiversity? Is it delivering for tourism? So we would definitely take account of all those things, but we have no specific view on A and C at this time.
And in relation, let's say, for example, farm effluent, slurry, these are things that people are concerned about in relation to water quality, sustainability of farming. Do you have views on that, or what model are you working to? Or are you trying to develop one on the hoof here?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I suppose this is a proposal to start the discussion towards developing a model, which probably doesn't make a huge amount of sense, but I guess we would look at agriculture as a section. So, for example, we went to meet with John Gilliland and his team that are developing the Agricultural Experts Working Group on Land Use, and that's a subset of the Agri-Food Strategy. So they've been charged with developing, I guess, a response to the Agri-Food Strategy, and one of the things that they're going to be looking at is resource efficiency, and wanting to do some voluntary action and behavioural change with farmers. They'll be working alongside that, developing, I guess, solutions to some of those problems, and we would very much see that fitting in with an overarching land strategy. But I think at the minute, one of the problems that we're trying to highlight is there are so many different rafts of legislation that all land users have to comply with, but it's unstrategic. It's very much done in separate silos, and we would like to see it come together to deliver outcomes that are of benefit to everyone and not just individuals.
And lastly, are you in the urbanite camp or the ruralite camp?
Urbanite or ruralite? Well, we would very much like to see both of those, I guess, working better together. At the end of the day, urban people are one of the main users of the rural areas, as well as the people that live there. So probably a fit in both camps, I would say.
So urbanites wanting to visit the rural areas?
Well, we would like to see it to be of benefit to rural people as well, obviously. But
If I could maybe come in on that, Chair, I'm very much in the ruralite camp coming from the Mourns, and I suppose just going back to the point on regulation, but to some extent this strategy is designed in a way to focus a bit more attention on things that affect our landscape that aren't regulated, in the way that we have a regulatory framework there, but from our experience there are things that fall between the cracks. So, for example, you take recent experience in our patch, the designation of ASSIs. That designation is put in place, and it caused quite a bit of concern among the farming community. But it also caused some concern among environmental interests, because it tends to be the practice has been we designate and that's it. But we in the task force would see a lot more scope for merging or complementing regulation with other activities, so that you work with landowners positively. You provide resources so that they can manage the land, both to continue to get a living and also to improve the environmental condition. Similarly, if as in our area you're getting lots of visitors, that there's an investment in services to manage those visitors, so that there is less disturbance on stock, so that there isn't interference with people's day-to-day business. So a lot of it is, on one hand, as John says, making the regulation more cohesive, but also maybe looking at ways that we can enhance our landscape that aren't regulatory, if that makes sense.
Okay.
John, thanks. I admire young idealism.
Okay. Paul, come again.
It all sounds good and it all can be talked up. We can all talk things up, I suppose. But how can we be sure that a land strategy will be sympathetic to the farming community and will not be another burden, another milestone round the neck? I think that is the fear and the concern that will be faced, that you will be faced with from members within the farming community, that this is going to be, free things up more for them, if you like, rather than being another milestone over their neck.
Yeah, well, I guess we want this to be, as we've said from the start, we want this to be as inclusive as possible. The land strategy doesn't exist yet, so it's a perfect opportunity for us to signal and to flag that we don't want this to be overburdensome on the farming community. We can also look to examples elsewhere in the UK where they are doing this already. So there's the pilot studies in Scotland that have a land use strategy, and we'll look to them and learn, I suppose, from their examples, whether it has been burdensome or whether it hasn't been, and try and reduce that burden to make sure it delivers for as many as possible. But maybe, Johnny, do you want to say something on national parks and maybe how?
Yeah, I undertook my doctoral thesis looking at and critiquing the governance approach to the consultation around the proposed Mourne National Park, and I suppose one of the big learning outcomes from that is the importance of a bottom-up participatory approach and including people from the outset, and that's something that we would very much encourage. And whichever department, or if the new merged department takes this forward, I think that's a fundamental learning outcome from that exercise. I think also having the Ulster Farmers Union involved in this process to date and helping us to edit this scoping report has been very helpful, and certainly we'd look to keep them involved going forward.
Okay. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. And I think it's very interesting. I think that's a worthwhile piece of work that you're at here. I think it's a massive work, if it ever comes to, a being, if you like. But one of the things that I'd say is there, the whole thing around one renewable or one turbine. Right? Have you or an outlook on that? Because this was one of the things that I find there that's unplanned, in the whole of the north. That there's areas that are concentrated there with wind turbines, as is in West Tyrone, and for instance, right, you know, and you talk about areas of natural beauty, the moorings have been exempt from all of that, I think, right, you know.
Well, there's a live planning application now, actually.
So what I'm saying is there, you know, I think they're an organised approach to all land usage there. Me is a sensible and a worthwhile project, you know, to follow on.
Well, I think that's probably a useful example, wind turbines, in that it's one issue where there isn't the traditional urbanite ruralite divide, if you like. You get folk on the farming community who are equally divided, folk on recreation, environmental communities, and I think what we have found in our patch, because there is a live application now, as I say, is that the policy and framework behind it isn't terribly robust, so it's not making necessarily for a good framework to have that discussion. We're certainly finding a lot of folk coming to us with concerns that, and it's generally people who are against them, saying this is an AONB, there shouldn't be this, only for us to have to explain, well, actually in Northern Ireland the AONB designation doesn't come into that consideration. So that's, now whether you feel that's right or wrong, that's just a wee example of where our policy maybe is catching up with development in that particular area. So yeah, I think that's one of the things where we talk about trying to give a bit more structure and more strategy to decisions around how we use land. That's probably a good example of where we're on the hoof a bit at the moment.
Just to add, I suppose that, you know, one of the major issues in Northern Ireland is single turbines, you know, and them dotted around the landscape in a non-strategic manner, and I think that's you know, a good case example of where a land strategy could probably weigh in and kind of say, you know, this approach is inappropriate, and you know, we need to support renewable energy as part of the renewable energy mix going forward, because we need to move towards renewables, but you know, they need to be in the right place, and we need to kind of develop that approach strategically, and we feel like that's probably been unstrategic up until this point.
Well, just here, I would agree there that you know, there's thousands of applications in for single wind turbines, and where does it stop? That's what my concern would be. You know, that if every landowner there decided, you know, or every farmer for that matter, you know, decided to put up a wind turbine, providing there, you know, that it was 300 metres away from a dwelling or whatever, you know, then they probably would get it passed and have the right to do that. You know, so you know, like I can just imagine, you know, the whole of the area dotted with thousands of wind turbines. You know, I think that has to be organised. I think it has to be controlled in some way. You know, so
Particularly, I think the scale of those turbines, they're very, very large single turbines as well. So that adds to the problem.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Sidney Anderson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen. I think you touched on Scotland, the Scottish sort of model for the strategy going forward. What information have you gleaned there? How can you tell us about what reaction and what information is coming back on the Scottish?
Well, I suppose.
What work have you done with?
Yeah, we don't have a huge amount of information, but I suppose the information that we do have is that the land use strategy in Scotland has got some legislative teeth. So it resulted as I guess it came out of the climate change bill there, which is primary legislation in Scotland, and this was a regulation that came out of it that Scotland has to have a land use plan to help it adapt to climate change, and I guess that came in and started to bring in all these different aspects like agriculture, biodiversity, tourism, all those different things, because they couldn't just single it out to climate change because it affects so many things. So they went through a very robust and long-term consultation process that lasted, I think, several years, where they very much had a bottom-up approach. They had workshops throughout the country where they invited farmers, landowners, land users, and a brilliant cross-section of society to inform what a land use strategy would do. And then they came to final sort of an implementation phase where they finally had the strategy. It was signed off by the minister, and then instead of implementing it straight away, they decided to do pilot projects. And that's the phase that they're in now. So they're doing pilot projects on the model that was determined from the strategy, and those are about halfway through at the minute. So they're reporting constantly on how well or how not well they're meeting the objectives. So in some places they're doing well and they're doing what they set out to, and in other places they're not. So they're using that to inform what's going to come next, and I'm not sure on what's happening on that next phase, but I think the next phase of pilots and projects runs from 2015 to 2020, and that's as much as I know at the minute.
Just while pilots going, are we talking about more so with the farmers and the landowners here? You could do pilots with certain individual groups which would not be maybe so much sympathetic towards the agriculture side or the farmer.
Yeah.
You see where I'm coming from here? So how much work is being done there? What work would you intend to do in relation to looking at that?
Yeah, well,
we have a number of groups. You have identified a number of groups. I'm sure we could think of many others who could be added to that, and
absolutely.
in the consultation, what views can be taken on board? At the end of the day, the bulk of the land is farmers. Those are the views that we need to take on board. We don't want to be over-regulated.
Absolutely.
I to this day that EU regulations, you touched on them yourself there, over-regulation is not a good thing either. So
yeah. We would agree with that, and I suppose we as a task force wouldn't be doing I guess pilot projects ourselves. This would be charged. I suppose we would see it best suited to the new Department of Agricultural and Rural Affairs and Environment. So that new merged department we feel would be best suited to deliver that, and we would expect, if they were to consult, that they would consult with a wide range of land users, agriculture being a major component of that.
I think drawing on the Scottish experience is important. From our initial discussions, we brought over officers from the Scottish Government to update us and inform our initial thinking around why we thought there was a need for a land strategy. So we have contacts there, and if we were to get some sort of joint event or an event going where we could broaden out this discussion, certainly those contacts would be willing to come over and update us on progress there, and from the south as well, with the National Landscape Strategy has just been launched.
And certainly, again, just to add to that, the point's well made. Like in Northern Ireland, and this is where we're very different from Scotland, we've such a high level of private land ownership that if you're going to manage land and landscape in Northern Ireland more than anywhere, it has to involve the farmers. So I would certainly feel any work that would come under this strategy, and particularly at a pilot stage when you were trying things out, would be very practically oriented. Otherwise, they're not going to work, and that's partly why we feel a more strategic approach than just regulation that is developed in Europe for Europe, to find out what actually works in our context. We found, again, going back to the national park debate, we found that the model that worked elsewhere, people felt it wouldn't work here. So it's maybe thinking, well, what can we do here to weigh up the different competing pressures that John talked about?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good job.
Thank you very much again for your presentation, and good to have you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair and members.
Move on to agenda item 6, written briefing from Darren, an update on 2015 single application. Can I refer members to the briefing paper from the department at pages 22 to 26? Can I advise members that the single application period began on the 18th of March 2015 and the opening of the online service by the 31st of May. 27,173 single applications has been submitted in total, of which 47% were submitted online and 53% were submitted on paper. 22,247 applied for the young farmers payments, 9,954 applied for area of natural constraint payment, and 1,771 young farmer regional reserve applications were received. The paper contains information on active farmer and the sifting out by DARD in this respect. There is also information on the young farmer regional reserve. Additionally, the department reckons that it will have to carry out between 2,100 and 2,500 inspections. These will happen either by remote sensing or by using the classic land inspection. The breakdown of inspections is at page 25. Remote sensing will take place in 4 zones. and will account for up to 85% of inspection. The value of entitlements cannot be finalised until administrative controls and on-the-spot controls are well advanced, with a payment timetable planned to issue in November. I suggest that we ask the department to provide us with an oral brief on a further update on the inspection process at possibly the end of October. Can I seek members' comments on this?
Great.
I think there is issues this year with all the new changes, and it is a note that it's going to be November before they give us a timetable on payment. So I do believe they're not so confident in themselves that they can deliver on this one this time. So it will be interesting, and certainly an update. And we're going to leave it to the end of October, I think.
Do you want it sooner? Just at the end
Mid-October, maybe, possibly mid-October, maybe. But I mean, it's
Mid-October's fine, yeah.
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I think it would be better.
Yeah, yeah.
Not leave it too late. Agenda item 7, correspondence. Can I refer members to the correspondence received at pages 29 to 35? Members' content action correspondence is suggested in the index sheet at page 28. Okay. Yeah. And item 8, forward work programme. Can I refer members to the forward work programme at pages 37 to 39? Can I advise members that a departmental briefing on EU issues has now been scheduled for the meeting on the 23rd of June, and as requested at last week's meeting, a briefing on the TBS PG has been scheduled for the meeting on the 30th of June 2015. Can I see agreement for the forward work programme?
Okay.
Agenda item 9, is there any other business? I do believe I did speak to the Vice Chair just on a line or two, and the Vice Chair raised it up the meeting in relation to the beef sector and suckler cow sector and that sector. Maybe at some stage I think that the committee maybe needs to look closer at this. I do think Scotland has I think it's a beef premium for young calves. The Republic has they pay a welfare payment, or did, I think. So there was ways of helping the primary producer. I do think, in light of current events on the beef market, I think it, and for some time I've thought that it will be important that we, in Northern Ireland, that we try to sustain that sector.
Okay.
Chairman, it might be good maybe if we find out the views of the Farmers Union
On the issue, yeah. The issue for some people in this is any monies, well, possibly if it's taken out of Pillar 1, any monies would then be taken from the single farm payment, the wider payment, unless it can be taken from the wider rural development programme, not out of Pillar 1. But there is an option to look at that. I do think in the long term, if we don't support that sector in some way,
in the South, Chairman, they're linking the subsidy to the calf.
Yes.
And improving the genetics.
That's one way of doing it. Yeah.
Economics, I think.
That's right.
Then, as a result, the money can come.
Better breeding, better quality calves, yes. And I do think it's important that.
Okay.
Do you want to get the department up? Do you want to get officials now, or speak to them, or do you want? We'll look at this next week in the meeting.
I'll go back and see when I can get maybe DART officials to come up and get a written brief from UFU.
Okay. Okay. Jenny, just want to finish off here. 2
seconds.
Agenda item 10, date and time of next meeting. The next meeting of the Committee for Agriculture and Rural Development take place on Tuesday, 16th of June at 1:30 p.m. in Room 30, Parliament Building. I declare the meeting adjourned.
Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.